from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
It is a pleasure to welcome our viewers to another program of the North Idaho College TV Public Forum. Our subject today is the Troubles, religious and political issues in Northern Ireland. For you viewers who were with us last week, we had two guests that did a wonderful job talking about their experience in Northern Ireland working on a habitat program. And they're back with us this week to talk about this issue that's divided Northern Ireland for many, many years. And we hear much about that on a regular basis within the media in this country. I am pleased to welcome to the program, first of all, Chad Klinger, who is a tenured faculty member at North Idaho College in the Division of English and Foreign Languages. And next to him is Mona Klinger, who is also a tenured faculty member in Speech and Communications. And I'd like to say that both of these guests are very good friends of mine and colleagues, and they help us with many programs at our campus, including our lecture series each year. Chad and Mona, welcome back. It's a pleasure having you here. We thank you for giving us all of this time, and this is a very serious and important issue that we appreciate your viewpoints and your reaction while you were visiting in Northern Ireland. And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panel members. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Shink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Janelle to commence today's questioning.
It is very interesting that you traveled to Northern Ireland, and one of the things that we like to do on this program when we're talking about travels to various countries is to locate that country for our viewers and explain something about it. Where exactly is Northern Ireland, and what kind of an entity is it politically?
Well, it's, of course, the northern section of Ireland. It comprises 6 of the original 9 counties of Ulster, one of the 4 main provinces of Ireland. As a political entity, it was created, I think, in the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, at which time, following World War I, England wanted to hold on to Belfast, particularly because of its industrial capacity. It's the only industrialized city in Ireland and was one of the major industrial cities in Europe. The creation of the present boundary was largely a classic exercise in gerrymandering, whereby boundaries are drawn up to include heavily Protestant populations and exclude the more Catholic populations of, say, County Donegal and so on. The country has since maintained its, well, I should say country, it is in fact had its own parliament up until 1974, when the Troubles caused England to decide that it would govern Northern Ireland from Westminster, which it still does. So it's not a country, I guess, it's part of Great Britain. But its present identity is of being Protestant, and it still holds, although it's a very thin majority right now. It's about 52% Protestant and 48% Catholic.
And what, in general, Mona, does the countryside look like?
Oh, it's a beautiful area, and it's unfortunate that with the Troubles, we've seen a real decline in people going to visit that area. It's green and lush and gorgeous coastal lines, kind of cold though, Steve. I know you like the warm climes, but kind of raw. And there are waterfalls. It's an enchanting area with, this is not part of the physical part, but some of the nicest people that you could ever imagine meeting. I think that's really the treasure, is the people.
And the language that is spoken is one that you can readily understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lovely, too. We had a number of chance encounters with people, and you would swear you were talking with somebody from a PBS series or something like that. The language is they use it beautifully.
Considerable Scottish influence there because of Scottish immigration to Northern Ireland. The typical greeting is something like, what about ye then, or something.
And I take it back, readily understood. Maybe I'll take that back. We were in a number of situations where trying to listen to the mother tongue, but it was a different mother tongue. I mean, very different from spoken American English at times.
And I'm sure different expressions
Oh, yes.
would be used to explain something.
Steve Sheen.
I've had occasional troubles understanding people right here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, so I don't think it would be surprising to find that difficulty in Ireland. Did your travels in Northern Ireland allow you time to also visit Ireland? Were you able to see something of that country as well?
Just Dublin.
Just Dublin.
For about 2.5 days.
Well, my question is one simply a perception. Did you notice any? Are there obvious differences between Ireland and Northern Ireland? I mean, do the troubles that we seem to hear so much about Northern Ireland, are they obvious to you as you tour that country?
In some ways, yes. You drive through Belfast and you see the so-called peace lines, which are walls, sometimes covered with barbed wire and so forth, that literally divide the city into sectors. And every once in a while, you come across this police station, which is a fortress. It's a solid wall with barbed wire on the top and surveillance cameras and so forth. And virtually every I saw only one, what we would call a police car in the 2 weeks I was there. The Royal Ulster Constabulary drives armored vehicles, and those are always followed by a British armored personnel carrier with 2 machine gun turrets on top and so forth. So in that sense, yeah, you definitely feel the presence of, or the imminence of sectarian violence in Northern Ireland, and you don't feel that in Dublin. On the other hand, I felt safer in the streets of Belfast, maybe because I was naive, perhaps because it has a very low crime rate and is kind of a police state with a heavy police presence. Anyway, I felt safer there than I did in the streets of Dublin, where the things that make you fearful in any large city are more in evidence. Some drugs, alcohol, fairly rough people, etc. So.
That's a very interesting observation. Let me follow that question up with one that's different. But again, I'm asking for your perceptions, and I'll contrast. Maybe we'll contrast those with what I perceive to be the common views of people in America about Northern Ireland. We view the problems there as religious problems. Was that the perception you got after spending time in Northern Ireland?
No, not really, in the sense that no one's arguing over those few doctrinal differences that Protestants, Catholics used to kill each other over centuries ago. Those are what the government itself, and I guess what social science call the one of the markers of tribal identities that separate two different peoples with two different senses of themselves. Yeah, you go through 10, and the graffiti varies from F the Pope to F the Queen, but it's not really, I don't think it's really a religious dispute. It's an economic, social class kind of thing. It's the result of what the Anglo-Protestant conquest of Ireland, that goes back at least as far as Elizabeth, really gets bad with Oliver Cromwell, whereby one portion of the population controls the other, and what we're dealing with now is in part ongoing resentment from the Catholic population and increasing fear from the Protestant majority in Northern Ireland that senses that it's losing its majority. And as with South Africa, maybe one day the house will crumble.
Hey, Tony, allow me one more quick question. You say that it's mostly economic, social, political. Are those differences obvious to you as you travel around? I mean, we talked about this a little bit as the show was starting. Are there obvious physical differences between Northern Irish people who are Catholic and those who are Protestant?
Perhaps there are to them. I don't think to us they were very evident. The English who established themselves in Ireland early on intermarried with the native people, and even in Northern Ireland, even things like Mac versus Mick are not really reliable for knowing whether someone's Protestant, Scottish, for example, or Catholic Irish. Ethnically, there's hardly any difference between Catholics and Protestants.
So it's
they
not
are
in the
all
speech,
intermarried.
it's not in the dress, it's not in the names, but it might be in the jobs they hold,
It
positions
might be
of
in the
power and
names, too. It
influence.
might be in the names
Yeah.
and where you went to school. We had an opportunity of touring the city, one of the city bus tours, and we were on the top layer of the bus, and it was one of those songs, it was a Bette Midler song or whatever, From a Distance. And we were going all over the city, and from a distance, in my perspective anyway, everybody looked the same. You know, and that's kind of the sad thing about it. And as you talk to the people, and I had conversations with Catholics and conversations with Protestants, the person at the street level just says, we just want to get along, we want to have jobs, we want to have a nice place to live. And so in other words, from that level, how can you tell the difference?
On that note, we're going to show some slides. You again this week brought some slides, and that's really helpful, and we'll ask our staff to put those up. And I believe we have about 6 slides that will illustrate some of the points that you're making concerning what you saw in Northern Ireland. That is a visual way of identifying some of these comments. And so if we could have those slides now, we will have you to take us through those.
This is one of many murals that the city of Belfast has become famous for. They are all, of course, political statements. This is in the Shankill area of Belfast, which is heavily Protestant community, and that is I guess what you call a unionist mural featuring the Red Hand of Ulster, which goes back to some myth about a king. Anyway, it's particularly important to the Protestant cause. And here we're looking at it looks like a nationalist Republican Catholic mural. You can see the harp symbol in the upper left.
And for the people there, these are very important symbols, and they send very different messages.
And we heard that you weren't really supposed to take photographs of these things, and yet people are very proud of them. So I'm not sure the mythology of the whole of all these murals, but they're very popular. There are books published on them and this kind of thing. And they're very proud of certain murals in certain parts of the city. And I guess people actually get kind of reputation when they have put up a mural. And sometimes it will be at physical, danger to do that. Also, making a political statement.
And
just another example.
Yeah.
Another example of the same.
How many
kind
are there? There's
actually
probably
2.
at least,
The top one's Protestant, the bottom Catholic. I think.
And there's at least how many in the city?
30 to 40 that are frequently.
And they'll change
photographed.
occasionally if something else, if a new bombing happens or something like that. Should probably go on there.
That's another. Looks like Protestant or Unionist mural. Those are the 6 counties of Northern Ireland that are listed there.
So it's not like in our country where the U.S. flag is a symbol for the whole country. Even with these symbols for each faction, they have more than one symbol or one thing that sends a message.
And interesting. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In the neighborhoods, the curbs will be painted according to the flag of the side that you're on too, and there'll be flags flying also.
So you've got red, white, blue curbs in the Protestant neighborhoods, and
here's another
green red,
shot of a particular area that you were in.
Well, this is off the Falls Road, which we're going to our place to work, which is the Catholic area, and that's our big green van that we traveled in, all the group from Habitat, 15 of us strong, and we were in a fender bender. That little electric milk truck hit us. Very minor kind of incident. And of course we had to call the police and all that kind of thing. And that's kind of, as the men from the workplace came to kind of our rescue, they said, now you're going to really have a Belfast experience. And this is what the people live with on a daily basis. So if you think you're kind of safe, or if you think these things don't happen there, this fender bender kind of defies all that. So what happened was, within a few minutes, we not only had the police there, but we had armored vehicles. On every single corner, we had soldiers in camouflage with automatic weapons. We could not, these were pictures taken surreptitiously, and we were very proud that they came out. But this was all as a result of a fender bender, because I guess in Northern Ireland, when a situation like this happens, it could be a diversionary tactic from a bombing that would be going on elsewhere in the city.
Right there.
Or right there, yes. So it was a kind of scary situation, actually.
The headline from a paper from about June 8th or 9th, in the middle of the marching season there, which we saw when we returned. We had to catch our return flight out of Belfast. And anyway, it's just this kind of headline and this kind of story and that kind of picture is, I guess, what was going on there a lot.
You mentioned that there are different times where the tension becomes greater. Is that from year to year, or does it just happen that at certain times there's things that develop that incite the violence?
It's yearly. And the dates, it's called the marching season. And Chad, you?
Yeah, each summer, starting June 8th, the Protestants of the Orange Order that goes back to William of Orange's defeat of James II in 1690 or whatever, and the establishment of the Protestant presence there in Northern Ireland. This is celebrated every year the way we celebrate the 4th of July by the Protestants, who stage big parades often through Catholic neighborhoods, unfortunately, and that is just a big-time provocation, which usually touches off all kinds of violence. And the British government is criticized for not preventing these marches from going through Catholic neighborhoods.
See, and that's the thing, they're right through the Catholic neighborhoods. And you have a situation where not only do they march, but then you have bonfires. And in fact, in our little city tours, you would see corners that people were piling like tires and trash and all this kind of thing to have these bonfires. So the bonfires may go on for 5 or 6 days, polluting the whole city. And we found out that a lot of the people that we worked with on the Habitat site are forced into taking like vacations at that time, because they do feel fear for their lives, or they think there's a danger to their lives. So they leave Northern Ireland at that time because of the marches. The Catholics do.
Janelle Berg.
You went to Northern Ireland, of course, to work on Habitat for Humanity homes, but in that process you learned a lot about the kind of economic conditions that were going on in Northern Ireland. What is the economic condition there? Are people employed? Is there unemployment? What is the economic condition?
On the surface, at least in many of the neighborhoods we saw, this does not look like a third world country. People look well housed and so forth, but it is pretty grim. I think unemployment, we're told, runs as high as 70% in Northern Ireland. It's very largely a welfare state in which many young men have never seen their fathers work, and in which, if you're not employed by the age of 35, you probably never will be. So there is a good deal of dependency, which perhaps rescues the people from outright poverty. But there again, that's one reason why perhaps even the resident Catholic population wouldn't be that eager to see the British government suddenly pull out of Ireland, because this huge welfare house of cards will collapse, and you can only imagine you might have another kind of Bosnia at that point.
So you have a wonderful education system in all of Ireland, and Northern Ireland has a fabulous education system, but everything is separate. But unlike the United States, the Protestant schools are totally subsidized by the government, as are the Catholic schools.
It's just that they're different schools.
And if the government pulled out, what would happen there? Even the Catholic schools would have a diminishment of their, the right word, would lose some of their funding then. So that's kind of an interesting situation then too.
Can you travel freely if you're a Northern Ireland citizen? Can you travel freely then to Ireland and to England and other places?
Recently, yes. I guess at maybe a few years ago there were checkpoints that you had to be careful of, but they actually do have a checkpoint, but I understand now that going between the two areas there's no big problem. However, coming out of the airport, for example, you must stop. There are police there, soldiers there. There's a heavy military presence at the airport, and so you feel a little bit insecure, or maybe overly secure. I don't know what the case may be, but because of that presence.
Steve Sheen.
Well, this is not a question of earth-shattering importance, Chad, but I have to know that if the blackened fingernail on your left hand is a memento of your work in Habitat for Humanity.
It's my black badge of courage from working on the Habitat
close
building
up of that
site.
one? I don't know.
Well, we got that cleared up. Let me move on to something else. I noticed that in the slides we showed there was a picture of the banner headline in the Belfast Telegraph, I believe it was. Did you find that the coverage of political events in Northern Ireland were far, far different in the Northern Ireland press than they are in our press? Are we doing a good job of letting people in this country know what goes on, or is it kind of a stilted view?
I think we probably get a reasonably good presentation of what's going on, but I don't think we can understand it really, what we're seeing. It probably strikes us as a kind of a stupid, senseless conflict because we don't know all the social, economic kinds of issues that are involved.
Well, it probably, we have a tendency, one of the phrases we use here is good church-going people, and you can think, why can't they just come to an agreement? But we've already talked about that. Let me rephrase the question.
I was just going to add that, as you know, the tabloid press in the United Kingdom is far greater even than it is here, and that does have a particularly inflammatory effect on the Troubles, I think. As one local resident said to us, the press have a lot to answer for.
Well, let me try the question from a little different perspective. As Americans who traveled to Northern Ireland, what surprised you most? What did you see there that was most out of sync with what you thought you would see?
Well, I'll temporize by saying first that to qualify everything we've said tonight, that the saying over there is that if you think you understand the Troubles, you've probably been misinformed. So I'll try to be humble and say, any observation I make is probably about half meaningful.
Well, we read a lot before we went, and got stacks of stuff from the San Francisco Chronicle and all this kind of thing. And I was really expecting to feel insecure there, and I was expecting people to be uptight and paranoid and kind of dour. And I found just the opposite. People were joyful, and although there is this military presence and that kind of thing, I never felt threatened. I mean, we had hovering helicopters and that kind of thing, but I didn't feel, threatened. So I think that was a big surprise to me. As I mentioned earlier in the last show, that when we were reading this at the dinner table before we left to our daughter who was 17, and going through all the Troubles, and she said, "Mom and Dad, what did you get us into?" And so we didn't really know quite what to expect, but I guess because the people are so wonderful and there's such a joy there, that the experience was ultimately terrific like that.
Did that joyfulness give you the sense that people in Northern Ireland think their problems are going to be solved, or are they happy despite that and resigned to them?
No, I don't think they're happy, and I don't think they see any big solution coming down the road. We were told repeatedly by a waitress here, a taxi cab driver there, that we're not really like this. It's just that 1% lunatic fringe, that perpetuates a struggle. And that may well be true. It's the paramilitaries, both Protestant and the IRA, for example, that have huge power structures that are vested in continuing this. And so in a sense, it's as if ordinary people are really feeling the effects of big mafia-like organizations which are feeding the flames.
Well, that's a misimpression you just corrected for me. I thought that masses of people, that the general population in those countries were involved in these problems, and apparently there's a sense that that's not true.
The people that we talked to kept referring to those people as the thugs. Who do they think they are? We just want to get along.
For example, the IRA tends to police its own neighborhoods, and it's very tough on drug dealers, for example. It breaks legs and kneecaps and so forth, people dealing drugs, but then we're told that that's often to protect its own market. It raises money by dealing drugs and so on. So
let's identify this for a moment for our viewers that are not familiar with this. You've already indicated, Steve asked you, that there may be a small group that are constantly involved in this conflict on both sides, but yet it doesn't take a lot of people to create violence and terrorism. But identify both the organization, the spokespersons for the two conflicting factions for us. You mentioned the IRA, but give us a little more information about
Probably not going to be very good at that, but there are about 6 major political parties, several that are unionist, loyalist, pro-England, several that are, of course, Republican, nationalist, pro-Irish independent state. And they range, of course, in their degree of moderateness versus radical extremes. Probably the biggest party that has Catholic support is the Socialist Democratic Labor, or something like that, SDLP. I think the L stands for Labor. And that's headed by John Hume, who grew up in Derry, same street as Seamus Heaney, Ireland's most famous poet at the moment. That is fairly moderate and positive. On the, I can't remember some of the Protestant parties. I think it's the Ulster Democratic something or other.
They're all alphabet soup after a while.
But at least one of those, strikes me anyway as being not much different from the Ku Klux Klan or whatever. And his, I can't remember his name, but person generally regarded as an inflammatory madman who is the principal spokesman for it.
There is a lot of division, and no party has in most elections has a majority in the parliament, so it's very divided and somewhat coalition government.
And Belfast, correct me if I'm wrong, has elected its first Catholic mayor, which is kind of an interesting thing, and everybody's very concerned about that. I mean, it hasn't been done. And he's already made some waves because I guess one of the first meetings he did not salute the Queen, toast the Queen. Everybody's now very worried what's going to happen here with having this Catholic mayor. It's an interesting political statement there.
Some of the leaders that have discussed this that are within Northern Ireland talk about this, that what you've indicated, that the Protestant group tends to look at themselves more tied to the Queen and Great Britain or British, and the Catholic minority, which is getting close to being 50-50, identifies more with being Irish in Ireland and the Catholic population in Ireland itself. But based on that, we don't have much time left, and I know that we don't expect you to be experts with a brief time in Ireland, but do you have hopes or any suggestion of how that this may be resolved in the future? I know you were encouraged last week with our discussion about habitat as a step in that direction, but you see anything else that may help?
Well, I thought when I went to Habitat and worked for 2 weeks, and we were Protestants and Catholics working in the Catholic group, that we were going to solve everything in 2 weeks. Really, I mean, that's the kind of, like we're doing this really good stuff, and if more people got involved, we would solve all the problems. And I think my own personal feeling is, while we were there, we saw how complex the whole situation is. I don't know.
It is complex, and it's been going for 100 years. On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. I have word from our staff that we're out of time. On behalf of the panel and our staff, Mona Klinger and Chad Klinger, thank you. We appreciate this 2 weeks with you. You're very kind to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week when we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.